Oh, yeah. Oh. Good evening, everybody. Just before we get started, I would just like to remind everybody that as per policy 1204, bylaws of the board, the regular meeting of the Board of Education will be recorded and may be streamed live, archived, and accessed online. The board also reserves the right to edit or by motion of the board at any meeting choose not to stream live or archive a meeting or portion thereof. So I'd like to call this meeting to order at 7:11 p.m. I'm going to start off with some very quick introductions. So I'm going to start with my far right. We have Trustee Tony Ward, Trustee Suzanne Perot, Vice Chair Shelley Coburn. To my far left, we have Trustee Marnie Wilson, Trustee Rod Ross, and Trustee our Communications Manager, Joanne Abshire. We have, oh, hello. We have Assistant Superintendent Mel Gill. And we also have our IT technical support, Dale Vogt. And we'll go over to our partner groups, starting on the far right from the Principals and Vice Principals Association, John Pusick, DPAC, Alicia Rempel, and then LTA Vice President, Ellen Bornowski. And we have our LTA President, Tanya Kerr. Joining us from QP 1260 tonight, Wendy Pierce. Awesome. Welcome, everyone. We will be now also, as we call the meeting to order, recognizing that I'd like to acknowledge that the Langley School District is located on the traditional lands of the Kwantlen, Kaitsi, Matsqui, and Semiahmoo First Nations. And we now need a report from in camera from our Vice Chair.
In camera, we discussed personnel.
Wonderful. And we now need to have a motion, please, that the Board of Education adopts the consent agenda items as provided. Moved by Vice Chair Coburn, seconded by Trustee Perot. All those in favor of adopting the consent agenda as presented? Motion is carried. And we are now on to adoption of the agenda. So could I please have a mover that the agenda be approved as presented? Moved by trustee Wilson, seconded by trustee Ross. Any changes of order, additions? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting the agenda as presented? Motion is carried. And we are on to item 6.1 now, superintendent's reports. And the first report is Truth and Reconciliation update.
Thank you, Board Chair Dykeman. At this point, I'm going to call upon Mike Pugh, who's our district principal for Aboriginal programming. And we continue to stay on our journey around truth and reconciliation. And Mike does incredible work here. And throughout the course of the year, we want to be able to share some stories and around our work there. And we actually had the opportunity, Vice Principal Jeff Keane at Brookswood got up to me at a meeting and was talking a little bit about excursion up to Haida Gwaii with some students, and it sounded absolutely amazing. And I thought, man, that's the type of stuff we need people to hear about. That's part of this process. Obviously, a great opportunity for students, and not only in learning, but I mean, I'd love to see that part of the country sometime. And why not bring that here? This would be a great chance to share this out, and so as part of this. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike Pugh at this point.
Thanks, Gord. And I appreciate the recognition, but I have to be honest, the work that gets done is done by the program and the amazing team that we have in our Aboriginal support workers and our support teachers, but it's also done through the schools and the work in the schools. And so this is just one shining example that I can share with you tonight to show the amazing work that's being done throughout our district. As always, I want to frame our learning tonight around the First Peoples principles of learning, and that learning really is about being experiential and relational, focused on connectedness, reciprocal relations, and a sense of place. And I think you will see that throughout tonight's presentation, especially when you hear from the students who had the opportunity. It recognizes the role of Indigenous knowledge. Obviously, every place we go has a different connection with the Indigenous peoples of that area, and certainly in Haida Gwaii, there is a different perspective there than there would be here. And recognizing the role of Indigenous knowledge within that community is important. And as always, learning ultimately supports the well-being of the self, the family, the community, the land, the spirits, and the ancestors. And I think all of these students and the staff who had the opportunity to go, I'm sure would tell you what an amazing experience it will be, and they will share that with you. But just how it's changed them going forward. Just bringing back the focus again, that constantly this is the work of our district, that we are focused on maintaining our work around reconciliation, all the good work we've done, and continuing to move that forward. And that really, as we get to reconciliation, before that, we need trust and we need truth. We need to hear the truth and we need to build trust in order to get to the reconciliation. And how do you build trust? Well, it's simply by making time for others, listening and honoring the stories that you'll hear, and building that connection. And this was something that I shared with the students prior to them leaving to go to Haida Gwaii, that this is really how they can go and build that trust when they're there. We shared with them some different definitions of what reconciliation is. This is directly from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission definition of reconciliation. We talked about it from Dr. Cindy Blackstock, who shared this. We also had two other definitions. There they are. This one from Jan Hare, who, if you have the opportunity to do the MOOC at UBC, this is where it comes in first. This is one of the first things she talks about. And really what it all comes down to when we look at all of these different definitions of reconciliation, it's about connection. It's about connection to others, to yourself and your own understanding. It's about connection to the land where you're at. And it's about building those relationships in a positive way. And so, as we've talked about before, when it comes to reconciliation, it is that own personal journey for all of us where we're on. And it's about holding Indigenous knowledge as equal to that we are used to learning here in our Western Eurocentric system, but holding that Indigenous knowledge as equal and not something else. And examine my relationship to Indigenous peoples. And I think this is what you will hear throughout tonight as the students come up and the staff come up to share their story about how their relationship has changed as they've gone through, what they knew, what they've come to know, and how they came to know that, and what implications that has for them going forward, and what that's done for them. So without any further ado, just to frame that around truth and reconciliation, I'd like to call up Vice Principal Jeff Keane from Brookswood and Pam Goldsack, the Aboriginal support worker, who will then come share some more information about their trip.
Thank you, Mr. Pugh. Good evening, trustees, DLT, partner groups, and other guests that are here tonight. My name is Jeff Keane, Vice Principal at Brookswood Secondary School. With me, Miss Pam Goldsack, Aboriginal support worker at Brookswood Secondary. And we brought 8 of our 9 travelers with us that went to Haida Gwaii at the beginning of September. Our presentation will outline why we went to Haida Gwaii and our key learning while visiting the islands. Our purpose really was all about curriculum and how it's put an emphasis on the core competencies and the First Peoples principles of learning. Through personal social responsibility competency, along with the principles of learning, students are asked to explore who they are, where they came from, and understand and respect other people's stories to allow individuals to be the best human being possible. Combining these 2 components of the redesign, along with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to actions, students were able to explore, connect, and reflect on the cultural experience with some of the oldest and richest history of British Columbia. The purpose of this trip was for students to gain a greater appreciation of who they are, their cultural background, and become empowered to further work towards reconciliation. Working with Pam Goldsack, Mike Morgan, Principal of Student Support Services, Mike Pugh, Principal of Aboriginal Learning, and Larry Goldsack, last year's Department Head of Aboriginal Worldviews and Perspectives, we took 9 students, 8 with Aboriginal ancestry and 1 without, to be part of this cultural experience. We engaged students in pre-trip lessons, which included talking circles to build trust and community in the group, and lessons of the European history of Haida Gwaii. Mr. Pugh, as he said, came in and completed the last lesson for us, providing a lens on reconciliation for us to really focus our trip participants before we left. Pam will now share her why.
As the Langley School District focuses on reconciliation and places a larger lens on Aboriginal content in classes, my heart and mind go to my students, all of whom are urban Aboriginals. They are always walking in 2 worlds, trying to navigate and balance their way through life. For students who are not firmly rooted in their own culture and place in the world, this can be a difficult time. As our schools wrestle with reconciliation, my students must reconcile with both outward worldviews and their own familial experiences and stories, or lack thereof. It is because of this I wanted my students to be afforded a sustained period of time where they are not having to choose between 2 worlds, but just to be Aboriginal. I feel in Haida Gwaii they were given that opportunity to just be one thing, Aboriginal, and to be given the opportunity to be surrounded by people who are comfortable and confident in their own Aboriginal identity and history, not trying or needing to be anything else. And that's my why.
For me personally, I have a historical geography degree from UBC with a focus on Canadian history and specifically the West Coast. So for me, I wanted to go to Haida Gwaii because I wanted to reconcile the Eurocentric teachings from UBC with the actual real history, the spoken history, the oral history of Haida Gwaii. That is why I feel the picture on the right, which is a picture of Balance Rock, is the perfect representation for our learning on the islands. Balance Rock was left at its resting place thousands of years ago during the last ice age. Its center of gravity is perfectly centered in its middle, hence its ability to balance. For all of us, we were able to center ourselves, find balance, and grow as humans during this time on Haida Gwaii. Our key learnings and takeaways that our students will share with you further proof of the balance that we were afforded while on the islands. So just a quick kind of where we went before we call up the students to share the rest of the presentation. We were fortunate to be able to take Marilyn Morgan, Mike Morgan's mother, with us as our personal tour guide. And we were hosted by Tanya Collinson, Mike Morgan's sister-in-law, while we were in Skidegate. Does it have a laser on it by any chance? Does it? Does it reach? Kind of. Okay. So Sandspit is right here, this first arrow. And Queen Charlotte City is on the northern island, which is Graham Island. And this is Queen Charlotte City, where we stayed. So we landed in Sandspit, took the small ferry to Skidegate. Our first 3 days were spent in Queen Charlotte City, and we stayed at the secondary school in Queen Charlotte, hosted by Principal Devlin Bradley. And we then traveled up and down the coast, the east coast of Moresby. And there we engaged in day hikes, spent time exploring on the beaches, did some river fishing, and for one of our guests, or one of our travelers, it was the first time ever holding a fishing rod. And we were doing that on the Talao River during quite a run of different species of salmon. We then traveled north to Masset, which is the arrow here, and we went across to the north eastern tip of Haida Gwaii, which is North Beach, and there we stayed at the Hayellen Longhouse. And there we were on North Beach, clamming, beachcombing, and we hiked up Toe Hill, which is a 750-foot, literally a hill, where everything else is perfectly flat, and we can see right out to the northeastern tip, and we could even see Alaska from the top of Toe Hill, which was very cool. We returned to Queen Charlotte City in hopes of heading down to Gwaii-Haanes. Gwaii-Haanes is this darker blue in the southern portion of Moresby Island, and this is where all of the historic Haida sites are. And unfortunately, due to weather, we were not able to get down there. But the captain of Haida-style excursions, James, was able to get us out to the Pacific Ocean and the west coast of Haida Gwaii. So we were able to travel between Graham Island and Moresby and the narrow channel that separates the island. And on a low tide, you can walk right across to the south. And as we were traveling out there, we saw sea lions, humpback whales, and James engaged us in a oral history of Haida Gwaii and the geography there, and a nice lesson on some of the natural resources that are up in the mountains and things that the Haida people would have lived off. So for the remainder of the presentation, each student has prepared a picture that they feel best represents their learning and their key takeaway from Haida Gwaii. So first, I would like to call up Tyra Martin and Sasha Pattison.
The totem poles of Haida Gwaii really immersed us in the culture of Haida. We were very lucky in the fact that we got the chance to visit some talented carvers such as Christian White and Jolyn Eden Shaw, who showed us their incredible works of art. I noticed some common symbols on these totems: killer whale, the beaver, and the eagle, all powerful animals in their own right, seen amongst many carvings and pieces of artwork. The totem poles have immense value in every indigenous community, and in Haida, it was especially prevalent that they represented strong spiritual, ancestral, cultural values. My reasoning behind choosing the photo I did, which was taken at the Haida Cultural Museum, was because it truly gave us our first impression of Haida. I found this site breathtaking and unlike anything I've ever seen before. I also chose this photo because of my personal experiences and memories attached to the trip. I got to see a beautiful new place that I've never been before with my best friend and got to do things that I'll never forget. Haida honestly represented freedom to me because I felt like I could actually breathe and I felt content with where I was.
When we were in Haida Gwaii, we went kayaking with Green Coast Tours. They're a locally owned company that provides everything you need, including life jackets and spray skirts. The tour guide showed us some basic steering techniques and how to control the kayak when we were still on land. They demonstrated how to use the pedals in the kayak that help you steer, but mine and tires were broken. This made it challenging, which we later found out. When we brought the kayak into the water, We had another short training session before heading out any further. The water was calm, which was great. Everyone else was doing well, but me and Ty were returning in circles. The guide had to tie the front of our kayak to his with a rope, but it didn't help. It only slowed him down. Then he untied us and showed us different ways of turning. We were far behind and struggling. We finally made it to an island and stopped for lunch. When we got back on the water, Tara and I figured out a technique that worked for both of us and really started to catch speed. We ended up ahead of the group, even though the waves were bigger and it started to pour. So it was a lot harder to navigate, but overall it was an amazing experience, and it taught me perseverance and how to overcome obstacles.
And now Zach Howard and Kieran Hunter.
Cedar trees are very important to the Haida people. They call it the tree of life because they use it to make everything such as canoes, masks, rattles, houses, boxes, tools, and clothes. To get the bark from the tree, they would culturally modify the tree, and this picture shows an example. It's culturally modified.
Haida Gwaii has a beautiful array of quiet and peaceful beaches that allowed your mind to be clear and at peace. The Haida people use these beaches not only to fish, but to travel on canoe and live right on them. They would travel seasonally to the north or the south of the island, depending on the resources needed. Till this day, the Haida people still fish and are building Haida-style canoes. They also are doing this thing called rediscovery with Haida kids. They would leave them alone on a secluded place with little materials for a couple of days.
And Skylar Vandergang, and our other trip participant that couldn't be here tonight is Will Clift, and I'll quickly talk about his piece once Sky's done.
All right. Pick this photo over here of the garbage because it shows how we respect to the environment that we were and visited. And we left the beach much cleaner than when we arrived there. We were walking along the beach looking for agate and noticed more and more litter as we went along. Once we were done looking for whatever shells and stuff like that, beachcombing, we turned around and decided to pick up as much of the garbage as we could hold. This photo doesn't actually show all of the garbage we got. This garbage is also a good but very small example of the resulting damage from the commercialization of Haida Gwaii. By the commercialization of Haida Gwaii, I mean non-Haida people bypassing the communities and culture of the islands, only to go fishing to a fishing lodge and take home a lot of salmon. Commercialization also brings many tourists, which may result in litter buildup from them and commercial fishing boats. Garbage also come to this island from as far away as Japan, as the Pacific Ocean currents bring the trash from the Japanese tsunami into the west coast of BC. Thanks.
And the picture on the right is a repatriated piece of a pole that was cut down by American yachtsmen coming up from San Diego and on their way to Alaska. And they stopped off in Guayhanas and decided that they were going to cut portions of the poles that they saw. And the RCMP and Coast Guard got wind of this back in 1970 when they did this and caught them in Prince Rupert. And so after arresting them and charging them and confiscating the boat, they were able to repatriate this pole, and there was another pole inside of the Kai Center, or the Haida Cultural Museum, that is inside, and again, kind of showing the commercialization of what's going on Haida Gwaii. Now I would like to call up Alex Gelpin and Allison Oldeker.
While we were in Haida Gwaii, many opportunities to experience Haida carving. We visited Christian White, James Hart, and Jolin Edenshaw. When we visited Jolin Edenshaw, he gave us the opportunity to try carving on his Haida canoe he was currently working on. The Haida canoes are quite large, as they are made out of a single huge cedar tree. At the front of the canoes, rather than being smooth all the way down, there is an abrupt stop where the canoe has a straight, blunt edge. This is not just for style. This design actually helps the Haida people canoe through rough. The straight, blunt edge would lock the canoe into the wave, turn, and capsize. A truly genius design. Carving is not something I thought I would ever experience, and without the generosity of Jolin, I don't think I ever would have. He gave up his time to give us a lesson on Haida carving, and this is an experience I'll never forget.
I chose this picture because it was the most memorable part of the trip for me. This picture is from Anvil Trail. It was memorable for me because of everything I learned and the stories I heard. A couple things I learned about the land was that the water looked like copper because of the roots from the cedar trees, as well as the trees were big because mostly the bears bringing up salmon to the trees. Then the bears would leave the leftover of the salmon, and it would help enrich the soil with nitrogen, making the trees go humongous. The other thing was our guide Marilyn and the information that she shared with us. I really enjoyed learning about Haida Gwaii from her and being able to talk with her and hear what she had to say about the land. We also got to spend time with some of the families in the area that invited us to dinner and also hear their stories. The entire trip was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, but it will stick with me. The thing that stuck with me was that the stories that I learned, the hospitality and kindness we were shown, and the proudness of the people of Haida. Even people that weren't Haida were still really proud of the culture.
And Jenna Oldeker.
So I chose this picture because it's our group picture. I really wanted to show this picture because it shows how we came together. On this trip, we became closer as a group, and we grew and learned together like the community of Haida Gwaii. Almost all of us had gone swimming, and we had so much fun doing swimming and in the ocean. It was really cold, but we all got to enjoy like 2 minutes of swimming. This trip, it's all some good. We were brought closer together with the community and the culture of Haida Gwaii. We all learned new things and stepped out of our comfort zones by taking healthy risks. A healthy risk I took on this trip was talking to new people and trying new things such as kayaking and clamming. So some ideas we had for bringing more culture to our schools was labeling rooms in the Haida and native language. In the first school we stayed at in Queen Charlotte City, all of the rooms were labeled in the Haida language. The names were above the doors, and the English translation was on the door. Another idea we had was more student art and having it more seen in schools. The first school we stayed at also had, when you first walked in the door, all you saw was the student art on display. Doing more activities such as button blankets, making drums and learning how to drum, learning how to pronounce names properly, the territory names, and getting students to recognize the territories instead of adults. I feel like other students would listen to students recognizing the territories and being more respectful towards that instead of having an adult do it where they're being told to do it, instead of, recognizing students actually enjoy doing this and respect this, so maybe we can follow that trend. And the last idea we had was having more presentations
in in the school assemblies, as in having people from the school district tell their stories and or elders coming in and telling their stories. Thank you.
Anybody? Okay. That concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know trustees do have a few questions. I've started a speakers list, and if you're okay with that, Trustee Pro is first on my speakers list.
Things I heard feelings of content and self, resilience, courage, respect, social responsibility, relationship, community, and adventure. How profound. Just absolutely an essential part of development and self-awareness and growth and understanding of who we are. What you have done as leaders for our youth, our students, this coming generation, have provided them a profound experience to not only find who they are, but to be free and operate in that spirit, and to be safe in that. And that is a tool in resiliency that nothing else can offer them. That is the foundation and the heartbeat of our learning, and I'm excited to see that experience for them, and I want to thank you for speaking to them and working with them and uniting their lives together and helping them to find that center of self so that they can feel safe in who they are, so you as youth can feel safe in who you are as you move through your school years, your academics, your community with your peers, and exemplify that leadership piece in who you are and who you've been created to be, with honor and security and safety and integrity. So I thank each of you for taking a risk and going and trusting the process and the journey and rising up to the call of who you've been created to be, and trusting your leaders to be present with you and carry you when you needed to be carried, and when you were circling in that ocean to trust that you were going to be okay and come out, because the least will be first, and you became first in that, and I applaud you in that journey, and thank you for sharing it with us.
And thank you, Trustee Pro. I have now Trustee Wilson. Trustee Pro, can I just get you to hit your microphone there? No worries, don't apologize. Okay, Trustee Wilson.
Great. Thank you all for your presentation. It was amazing. I love that as students you gave us suggestions on how we can work more towards reconciliation, because oftentimes people don't really want to tell trustees what to do, but from students, that's just amazing. So what a powerful thing, and we will definitely look at those suggestions and consider them and put them into place if we can. So when I hear from you guys, it makes me so proud to be part of this school district and that you had this amazing opportunity. I think it was great. I heard Ms. Goldsack talk about, speaking about the difficulty of navigating between your two worlds, and I think that if anyone can help you guys with that, it is this team. It's so powerful. And although I haven't worked with all of this team, Ms. Goldsack is one of those educators where students come back for years and years and years, well into their adulthood, and visit her and talk about how proud she made them of their culture. So I'm sure she will do that for you as well. So I thank you, the students, for presenting to us so eloquently and putting yourselves out there to do that. And I thank the educators for making this opportunity happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Wilson. I have Trustee Todd, and then Trustee Ross, and then Vice Chair Coburn.
Thank you. The cedar, the tree of life, experiential learning at its finest. When we talk about First Nation principles and we talk about a sense of place, I'm not sure you could have gone to a better place in BC to fill yourself, to be transformed by a sense of place than Haida Gwaii. It's long been on my own personal bucket list, and you've inspired me to go there. I love the stories. You talked about oral history, your curiosity that took you places, whether it was in a kayak or carving. Just generally speaking, the idea of centering yourself by being in nature. And that's good medicine for all of us. And that there is a big life lesson. And I know, without a doubt, because we've all had field trips, everybody in this room, but this field trip will have changed your world perspective. And that's the magic in it. So thank you. Thank you for being courageous. And thank you for giving us something to work on.
Thank you, Trustee Todd. We now have Trustee Ross.
Well, just a thanks to the presentation and to the team for coming out tonight, and parents that are in the back row as well. So thank you. I'm interested in the word trust, and you used the definition time, listening, and connection. And so I'm going to spend some time just sort of reflecting on that. And so I appreciate that. I was just wondering if you could just, I have a key interest in earthquake preparedness, and I always think of Haida Gwaii being quite, challenged in that area. Do you have any comments for us? Any learning on that, or was that not even an issue?
No, but when we were up on the north coast, on North Beach, where we had just finished hiking the day on Toe Hill, and we're looking at Alaska, and I'm lying in bed in the High Ellen Longhouse, and I start to think to myself, because earthquakes is my biggest fear, and I start to think to myself, what are we going to do if the big one hits? We have no Wi-Fi, so my phone's not going to go off and warn us that a tsunami is coming from Japan. And so I think, okay, we're about, 400 meters to the start of the path to Toe Hill to go up 700 feet. I guess I'll be the last one. The students will be the first one, and Pam will be somewhere in the middle. And that was my escape route if something were to happen. And then after the trip, Pam basically said, well, you do realize because I shared this with her after, and she goes, you do realize that if the big one did hit, you just got to go with it and just realize that you just finished your life in the best place possible. So that's where we were.
Thank you. I have Vice Chair Coburn.
So for the travelers there, that's a wonderful experience that you've had, and it takes a lot of courage to come and talk about your experience in front of strangers, and also a more of an emotional experience too, because for some of you it's quite personal, and there's probably a lot that was going on, so never easy to be vulnerable. So thank you for sharing. I think that you'll do a lot of good work with your learning. So to the administrators, I don't know who can answer this question. I think this is an excellent idea for a lot of reasons. And I think that it would be really wonderful in the spirit of reconciliation, because it demonstrates what reconciliation is, because it seems like such an abstract concept. And so when I think of our First Nations, I think of the water crisis. And before I forget, I loved your why. It was just so beautiful. Thanks, Pam. So back to that, 400 out of 618 First Nations were under a water advisory between 2004 and 2014. And so, yeah, Haida Gwaii is beautiful. And it's a trip of a lifetime, and it was wonderful learning. But I'm just wondering if we ever see anything in this district going forward where we can start sending our youth and our teams to go in and to look at the reality of a lot of our First Nations, their peers, the people their own age, who don't have access to drinking water, and what we can do as people in British Columbia to go and support. To me, that looks like reconciliation. And not that this doesn't, this is wonderful. And especially with urban Aboriginal, there's no territory, it's a very tough, and that being in two spaces, I thought just really summed it up beautifully for me kind of get my head around it. But it just got me thinking of, people are better when they're helping. You don't get joy out of owning stuff and buying stuff. You get joy out of helping and receiving and giving. And I just think what a wonderful legacy that could be for the Langley School District if we worked towards, and I'm sure there's lots of liability, and I'm sure I just would love to just plant that seed of what more so we can enrich our own youth in our district, and they can enrich the lives of others, and the trickle-down effect of that to me would just be such a wonderful legacy. But your trip was beautiful, your courage was wonderful. We have such a wonderful department, Michael Morgan to Mr. Pugh. You have done fantastic work, and to you guys, good for you, and thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just gonna...
Okay, so we'll try again, Mike. Maybe you can answer my question.
Well, I think, to be honest, you don't have to go very far to deal with the water crisis. The Semi-Amu First Nation is still working their way towards drinking, clean drinking water and connecting to the sewer. And there's, but I think ultimately what it comes down to is that what you're talking about is kids giving back. And I think for these students, one of the things I heard at the end was that their plan is to continue to give back. And so they've had a tremendous learning experience. And first and foremost, I want to say thank you to all of you for being here tonight to share that, because there is power in story and power in sharing that story. And I think the continuation of them going to share that story to promote to other students, whether it's in Brookswood, whether it's in the family of schools, whether it's going out to other schools to look to build, this type of a trip, because I know this idea it's kind of sprung when I was still at Brookswood with Mr. Keene, and it had come from Earl Marriott, I believe, and from there where they were doing a similar trip. So it's that kind of spread out from one to another to share out, but also the idea within it is, yes, you get to go and have this amazing experience. Now, what are you going to do when you get back? And certainly, yes, there are other places where they could go and help, and we could certainly look at that. But I think also, too, we want to be able to say, we're going to go and experience somewhere and now bring that back here to make things better for us here in our own situation.
Thank you very much. All right, so I have Trustee Ward, and then I just have a few comments after. Trustee Ward.
Thank you for your presentation. Glad you guys are all wearing Brookswood colors. So well done. Lot of thoughts come to mind. When I was in grade 8, I went on a trip, but it was not the same type of enriched experience that you had. But we did go up to Prince Rupert from Port Hardy, and it was a band trip, and it was nothing like it. So I just encourage you. You will have great memories, but embrace those memories and the friendships that you've made. And this is a lifetime experience. So, I congratulate you for jumping in the ocean. A lot of people won't do that. You do want to. These experiences offer opportunities to embrace it and to really touch the senses, and that will lock in the memories even better. So, congratulations. I know it's cold because I went to Vancouver Island this summer and it was cold, and I went in the ocean at that time. So it is chilly, and it wasn't that far north. So other few things, experiential learning. Other people have talked about that. A few of you talked about getting out of your comfort zone. So there's a few things. Even presenting here is getting out of your comfort zone. So the trip obviously offered some of that opportunity. But continue to do that. Challenge your fears, get out of your comfort zone, speak in front of people like this, and build yourself as leaders. So these opportunities offer you chances to do that. So again, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Trustee Ward. So I'll just clear this. There we go. So thank you for your presentation. It really was meaningful. As I reflect back on the beginning of our Truth and Reconciliation journey, I remember our meeting in 2015. It was at the end of the year, and it was June. And we had the privilege of having Kwantlen Elder Josette Dandurand, one of our Aboriginal support workers, Luke Dandurand, and former trustee Cecilia Ricci come and make a delegation. And they shared their experience from Ottawa. And at that time, Chairperson Rob McFarlane spoke on behalf of the board and the district, and making a commitment to move forward in truth and reconciliation. We started with these plaques, and these beautiful plaques have gone up in our schools. And there was lots of updates and conversations about what it would look like as we started to implement that journey through the district and how that would come in. And what really stood out to me tonight was this is far beyond anything I think we can imagine, looking at how this journey has intertwined in all of the learning outcomes and how you've been able to connect this journey and bring back that shared knowledge and really embody the sharing with each other and your peers and other schools, and going to places and connecting those meaningful and authentic experiences. And so to have the opportunity to have a report like this to come back and say, there was a commitment. We were recognizing that there was the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee that was finished, but as a district, we have an opportunity to seize this lost opportunity and move forward in reconciliation. And then to see that, and as Trustee Wilson mentioned, for you to bring recommendations back and for all of these shared conversations and these shared experiences to be taking place with so many generations and connecting with our elders and connecting with various communities, I think that we're so fortunate to be learning from you. And we as a district are so fortunate to be sharing these, and the work of staff really embracing that commitment, and then our youth, our future, and everybody else coming together. I don't think that when this commitment was made in 2015 that anybody could foresee this type of authentic learning taking place. So thank you for the privilege of you sharing it with us, and really for the opportunity to learn from you. And thank you for your commitment to seeing this through to every staff member, and for you to take our youth and have this type of authentic learning is something that really not only does it embody this, it also embodies our mission. And so I thank you on behalf of Langley Board of Education for sharing this. So have a great night, and thank you. So on that, fellow trustees, I will need a mover that the Board of Education receives the update on truth and reconciliation. For information as presented, moved by Trustee Todd, seconded by Vice Chair Coburn. Are there any other comments on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you very much. Thank you. Have a wonderful night. So we are now on to another really exciting superintendent's report, and I know that this is going to be equally as inspiring. So Superintendent, we have 6.2, Installing Our Schools Multi-Year District Plan. Over to you.
Thank you, Board Chair Dykman, and I can't believe that they're leaving, Don. I mean, given what you've got to present here, you might want to call them back in to hear what you've got to say. So I'm a little hurt here. So come on up, Don, to the podium. Our phenomenal director of instruction. I'm going to say more than I should, and I'll get in all kinds of trouble. But I can't help but commenting a little bit on this because there's lots to share. And in full credit to Don and the team, there's a team that are working on this. Mike Pugh will also be sharing some perspectives on this. I believe Mike Morgan is going to do the same. And it really, this is informed by our Aboriginal communities, this particular program or process that we're going to go through. But really what it speaks to, I just talked to Don, so you may not be aware that with the trustees just prior to this meeting around this, and really wanting to instill a belief throughout our the Langley education community that we firmly believe all children can be successful, that we do need to work to their strengths, and we do want an experience for our kids that is meaningful for them in the system. So this is incredibly difficult work. I mean, it really, really is. And Jennifer Cates is someone that Don and the team came across that could really help inform this. You know, when you work down to all these different stories of these children and what it's going to take to help them be able to experience success in our system, the toolkit that has to be developed within everyone, but it also starts with that foundational belief that kids can do it. And I'm looking forward to the journey. This won't be the last time. The trustees of community certainly hear updates on this one, because this is not something you are ever able to knock off in a week or a month or even a year. It is quite a process, but a lot of work underway, and I'm looking forward to the three of them as they share their insights and get us started. So thank you for coming tonight, and you want me to try to get all the kids to come back in to hear this, or are you good? I think we're good. Okay, all right, turn it over to you.
Let's talk. Am I on? Okay. So we're going to share, as Gord referred to, this is really heavy lifting, and I feel good that we have a plan. That's a really good place to be in right now. So we're going to share this multi-year district plan to you. It started actually off being a 3-year plan. It's now about a 5 to 7 year plan, so we'll see how that goes. But I also want to say that this is a big team that pulls together many departments in our district. And this was something that was really important to us as we sat down around the table and started to talk about how is our work connected. And really it all comes down to our work is connected by that really important goal for our district about successful transitions for all of our learners. And as we sat down around the table, and we have learning support services, and we have the Aboriginal Education Department, we have instructional services, we have children in care, ELL, and we all are looking at this and saying, we're really good right now at identifying who our learners are that we're not being successful with, but what are we doing about it? And so when we started to talk about, we all had really good ideas about what we needed to do to improve outcomes for students. But what we recognized is that we have a system that's full of change right now, is in change fatigue. So how could we approach it in a really holistic, thoughtful manner that scaffolded the change throughout the system, that was that built on the strengths of the system that we have in place right now. So it was really exciting to sit down and talk with that group and talk about what was going to make sense, and to see for the first time that I know of, since I've been in the district for I don't know, 25 or 30 years, something like that. I'm just going to round it off. But these departments working together towards the same goal and coming up with a plan that makes sense for all of these departments.
And so I think, as Don alluded to, we needed to weave our own learning into some understandings, and we went back to the First People's Principles of Learning, and this is not only true for the presentation tonight as we weave the narrative through, but also for our own learning and as these sessions that we go through, that the learning is relational. Really, the work we do is focused on ensuring that all kids feel connected, that they have relationships that bring them into the school, that connect them with the school, the work that they're doing, and that they have that sense of place and that sense of belonging. Because if they don't feel like they belong, they're going to be very difficult to be successful in the system. And that ultimately, if you belong, it goes back to your own sense of well-being of self. And this is also true, as Don alluded to, we have a system that is in change fatigue at times. And that sense of well-being being brought in for everybody who's a part of it, not just us as the team, but the teams that are coming to the presentations, and hopefully as it moves out through the staffs and the students, we'll see that sense of well-being for everybody. So when we look at and we talk about that sense of belonging and that sense of connection, we go back 10 years to the original enhancement agreement logo from 2010 and 2015, which is there on the left, where it focuses, starting with the red, in the spiritual to the emotional to the physical to the intellectual. And what that really gets at is there's a purpose to it being a circle. It's with full intent, that it's about the whole child, the whole person, that we need to focus on all aspects of that child for success. And that this really spoke to ensuring that we looked at everybody in a way that included their whole vision. And from that logo, we move forward to the next iteration, from 2015 to the end of this year, with the child as the spiral in the center, representing their shwali, their spirit, their gifts that they have, with the hands reaching to the ancestors to connect, and then reaching forward to bring the teachings forward to help support these students, with the ultimate goal being all of us working together to nurture those gifts for every child, because every child has a gift. It's our job to go find that gift, and it's our job as the adults in the system to ensure that we connect them in some way so that their gifts are recognized and brought to fruition. And so this logo 10 years ago was created as a result of the Aboriginal program and the community coming together and saying, this is really the work that we have been doing for years, that has been done through the program, but it needs to be done by more people. The program itself cannot do that work. And so it was shared out through the enhancement agreement to get everybody a connection to it, to bring it to the entire district, so that it is the work of everybody's work to move that forward.
Thank you, Mike. What you'll notice is this is also the medicine wheel and the concept by Dr. Martin Broken Leg of the Circle of Courage. And the Circle of Courage is basically, how do I exist in the world? He has a book called Reclaiming Youth at Risk. And we don't really use that word at risk, but what we talk about is reclaiming kids as our own, reclaiming kids who may not be successful if we don't have interventions, reclaiming them as part of our community. And if you think about the Circle of Courage, it tells about how can I be in the world as a person. So think of a baby. We all start out with belonging. Belonging is the essential place. So a baby can't do anything for itself. I taught Roots of Empathy once, and when I said that to the kids, there was one really smart kid, and they said, well, no, the babies teach us empathy, which was what I had been teaching them for 8 weeks, and I'd completely forgot that. However, in order to belong in any place, it's something that you don't have control over. It's the other people in the community who have control over that. So this idea of belonging, which then leads to independence. I belong in a community, and then I can function on my own in a community. So as a baby, you begin to grow, you can be out on your own, and then you gain mastery. And through mastery, we look at our support staff, our teachers, our administrators in the district. They're a perfect example of this. They've gone to school, and they've practiced their craft, and then they come back, and they can be generous with their gifts. And this idea of this full circle of generosity of children then, if they belong, if they're independent, if they gain mastery, they can be generous back with their gifts, again, contributing to the well-being of our community. We started to do this work in silos. And we've started to do this work because we know of the importance of it. And as Don will allude to, we want to give you some history about the work that the district has been doing for many years and how we're hoping to tie this all together.
It was really important when we sat around that table and we started to look back at the work that we've done as a district. And even if you take it back to our previous superintendent, who did a lot of work with our administrators around Hattie's research on how do you become a really effective school. And we started with our level 1 and talked about what makes a safe and orderly environment. And then we talked about that and what are the pieces that we need to have in place for that to happen. We moved on to level 2 about that instructional framework. And then 3, we went on to the guaranteed and viable curriculum, which really happened, it was very timely that the redesigned curriculum started to come in about that time that we were actually talking about Hattie's work at that level. We started to move on to level 4, but when we sat around the table, it went back to this place of we need to revisit level 1 because safe and orderly environment means something different to us now. It's not just about ensuring that kids feel physically safe. It's really important that our kids feel emotionally safe, that they feel comfortable and they feel connected and they have that sense of belonging. So this all started to tie in together as we really hit on this whole theme of sense of belonging and what does that mean and what is the really deep work that we need to do around that. And tying it into the work that Mike and Michael have just been talking to you about, it really got us excited about where we could go with this.
So if we look at our data and we want to think about our schools are very safe for many kids. And our schools might not be safe for other students. And when we look at our mutual success, when we talk about mutual success, what we mean is the success that we experience together with the student. So you think about one student and their journey through school, and the SEAs, the youth care workers, the teachers, the custodians, the administrators. I'm missing people for sure, but all of those people who go into that journey, that's mutual success. Parents as well, sorry. If you look, this is our success, our mutual success rate with different reporting categories. So category Q is learning assistance. Sorry, not learning assistance. Help me out. I'm the director. Learning disabilities. Students with learning disabilities. And if you look at the success, the mutual success that we've shared through supports that those students have gotten, you look at the completion rates rising and rising and rising. Keep in mind, our completion rates hover for all students above 85%, close to 90%. So you'll look at a bit of a gap. If you then take category R and H, and category R and H are essentially the same, but they are a level of severity above either mental illness or behavior. So it's a very broad category. And if you look at those students in our district, we are not experiencing mutual success with those students. So we've looked at the data tells us the same, and by no means are we different than any other district in the province. Every other district is facing this opportunity. So here is what we thought as we sat down. If all students have a sense of belonging in learning environments that respects diversity and are supported by system-wide responses to instruction or intervention, the district's 6-year completion rates will increase. So we'll talk about universally designing things and system-wide responses to intervention. An increase in our 6-year completion rates will mean that more students will transition with a sense of dignity, purpose, and a plan for the future. And ultimately, going back to what Mike had started with in the First People's Principles of Learning, is that this is going to improve the well-being of our community. And we cannot stress this part enough. We are a rapidly growing community. Rapidly growing communities often have challenges for the well-being of the community. We know that the work that we're doing today in the top bullet is extremely important for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years of our community of Langley. So I'll hand it over to Dawn to talk about what are we going to do about it, because Dawn always says, okay, let's get moving. Now we got to do something.
Let's get her done. So again, just going back to that idea of having a little bit more of a holistic approach to the things that we wanted to do. We talked about things like universal design for learning and responses to intervention. These terms in themselves and separating them out causes a lot of angst in our system because it's a whole bunch of new things to learn. And so we had to really take a look at how can we do this work in a really systematic way that is, again, scaffolded in a system that is already experiencing a lot of fatigue and change. We started researching what different models there might be a model out there that might work, or we might have to put together a model ourselves. But we came across Jennifer Cates's work. Jennifer is actually out of UBC, so it's wonderful that she's local and she's not just Canadian, she's from BC. And she has come up with this framework that really embodies mental health, well-being, and reconciliation. And she really checked off all the boxes in terms of the pieces that we wanted to put together. And she had already put them together in a framework that really made sense and that was very holistic. And in fact, the plan, the name Ensouling Our Schools, came from her book. She hasn't said we can't use it, and it really resonated with us. But I want to read out, and my apologies to those of you that have read the board report, but there was this one piece that she wrote that really spoke to me about her work. It says, Jennifer acknowledges that currently the rates of depression and anxiety are significant and far too large for any single school counselor to address. At the same time, 47% of teachers in Canada will leave the profession before retirement age. Walking into schools today, you can see a level of stress and burnout like never before. We must bring back the heart and spirit of education, the love of learning and teaching, the sense of belonging, community and connection. It is time to ensole our schools. So while we have stolen the name from her book for our plan, again, she hasn't told us we can't, so we're just going to carry on. But it also, it seems to really have resonated with people when we talk about it. And it certainly provokes people into wondering what that is all about. So a little bit about Jennifer's model. She has, it's called the 3-block model. We are starting with the social emotional learning, developing compassionate classroom communities. So this is a bit different, in fact, in terms from Hattie's work. When we talked about the safe and orderly environment in a school, we looked more at the school. We didn't necessarily dig right down, drill right into the classroom. So we really liked this notion of actually developing compassionate classroom communities, and what does that look like, and how do we do that? The next part of the model, the block 2 part of the model, is the inclusive instructional practice. How do we create pieces so that all of our learners can access the curriculum? And that, the work that we've already done with Jennifer has been very enlightening. We've learned a lot about that already. And then finally, what are the systems and structures that have to be in place for this model to work and for us to develop compassionate learning communities with inclusive instructional practice?
And just before we go through the system, I think it's important to point out, too, that with Jennifer's work, her experience comes from her time in Winnipeg, where she learned from the local First Nations in Winnipeg and developed this theory. And she actually tells a story of how she went in one day and she met with one of the local chiefs who was also part of the education system there. And she pulled her in and said, well, I've just seen your new idea around ensoling our schools. And she pulls this binder off of the shelf, and there it is. And she says, like, this is what we've been doing too. And it fits perfectly. And one of the things that we really felt was important as we brought this forward for the first night was to not only respect the fact that her learning has come from elsewhere, but respect the learning of the local nations. And so we were blessed to have Kevin Kelly and Michael Kelly Gabriel come that afternoon and start us in a good way and share their understanding of learning and ensoling our schools within their local knowledge, and share that with the group to then share out to Jennifer's work. And I think Jennifer has all these little tips and tricks, but really it gets at the heart of the spirit for everybody. How do you connect with each other? How do you build that relationship? And so that's what year 1 really focuses on here, is creating teams that have a good, solid understanding of what it means to have a compassionate learning community, that they can essentially, in a train-the-trainer model, go back out to their schools and get that information out. How do we do it in a way that makes sense to get it from a small group to a larger group to our entire district and get that out? So this is where we'll be developing the district implementation team and working moving forward. Our goal for next year is to then continue on our work and have our schools really delve into that block 1 around the compassionate learning communities and do a lot of work in that area at the same time as the teams come back together to do further learning around block 2 and that inclusive instructional practice. And then you can see how that would frame again for the following year. Now we can begin our work even further into blocks 1 and 2, because it's not just about we did block 1, now we move to block 2. It's continuing the integration of the two, but developing those school teams that now start to provide that response to intervention, those systems and structures. And while many of those may be at a district level, there will also be some systems and structures within the school that will allow them to develop those systems to a school context to help support kids. And as Don alluded to, we had hoped at year 3 that we'd be on the road, but of course, we realize it needs to continue, and that support will continue, and what it may look like at that point will be different. But the hope is by that point, we will have every school with a compassionate learning community with inclusive instructional practice where every single child will belong, where they can come, they can share their gifts, and they can feel safe and secure at all levels, not just in terms of academic inclusion, but as she talks about also in social inclusion, and how those children feel safe to be there every single day.
So just quickly going over some of the strategies and opportunities that we have either implemented or are in the process of implementing for this year. We've got our strategic team, which I shared with you at the very beginning, that's working on what does this look like and fleshing out the plan. We have already started a dinner series with Jennifer Cates, and we had representation of a school team from every single school there. That was teachers, resource teachers, admin, youth workers, Aboriginal workers. We're also just in the process of planning a day or a half day for our elementary and middle SEAs about what does this look like. We've already attended 2 days, 2 full days with Jennifer Cates, so that our team had a really good idea of the direction that we were going and how we could support that. Getting her book out to schools that want to do book studies, and the counselors have been doing work around enrolling our schools. Learning Support Services is working on Block 3 already, looking at what might that look like in order to support this plan. We're continuing some of our other work that all fits into this plan. That the staff well-being grant and the work that we've been doing around staff well-being is continuing, and it's year 3 of 3. We are continuing to work to do our training with our mental health literacy piece. So that is continuing. EASE is a new program that's come in to help educators understand anxiety and strategies for dealing with students who are anxious. So these are all things that are happening this year. Even our Dare to Lead book study, which is there's about 80 participants and learning about Brené Brown's work and how that fits in with enrolling our schools. Mike's talked about the Aboriginal Department has already been leading the way and is very supportive of the direction that we're taking with this. We've been doing some RTI training with district and school staff, so really doing some in-depth training to try to fit into this model and see what are the pieces that we really need to move on. And then finally just creating a district implementation team, because it's not just the steering team that we need people on the ground that are going to do that work, and we're looking at our district support team, which is instructional services and learning support service district teachers, to start to take on that work.
So in summary, of course, everything has to tie back to our strategic plan. And when we looked at the education lens, the educational opportunities, it struck us that we are covering a ton of the goals through this plan. So if you take a look here, these are all of the actions that we feel are looked after through the Enrolling Our Schools plan. And when you think about the work that a teacher has to do, when you think about the work that an SEA has to do, a youth care worker has to do, or a resource teacher, a learning assistance teacher, the joy that has to be involved in this work. I was reading an article last week about the emotional labor of teaching. And we often work for students who have the ability to bring the greatest joys to people and also the deepest lows. And we have to be there for each other as a team to lift up these students. The statistic that Don had shared about teachers leaving the profession, that can't happen here. And we have a very, very firm belief that the work that we can do together can definitely make our community safer, our community healthier, but also, more importantly, that spiritual aspect of it can also be a joyful place to work. So when we go back to the strategic plan, we feel really, really confident that we're tackling a huge portion of our educational opportunities in regards to that.
Thank you. Wow, that was quite the report. Thank you. I do have a speakers list, so let me start off with Trustee Perot.
Awesome. Just busting at the seams here, sitting at my seat, bubbling and moving, and got these questions, and as I'm listening, you're answering them, and I'm like, wow, this is so exciting. You had targeted the strategic plan so well. but most importantly, this is my passion, and you know that, and I always qualify with that, so forgive me. And I've had my ear to the ground on this one for 6 years with us. And the movement from where we were to where we are is so profound. It's so profound. And the heart that you're carrying for our students and staff collectively is amazing. The work, the RTI, working towards self-efficacy for our students and our educators alike. It's creating such a strong foundation for all your targets to be achieved in due time. And I thank you for your diligence, for hearing your community, hearing your partner groups, hearing the parents, hearing the students, listening through behavior and listening to your colleagues and taking that in. And I know you're doing that because I sit at the committees and I watch what you're doing. And you're pulling it in, and I see comments coming through the vision that's happened at committees, and it's really quite profound. And that heavy lifting you're doing, it's the hearts, and it's all about relationship. And our kids don't unless we have their hearts, and that's the foundation. My children with LDs, right? It was like, if we get their heart, we'll get their mind. If we get their heart, we'll get their mind, and they'll succeed. And those numbers come up because of that. And so, despite I had these wonderful questions, you answered 99% of them, and I thank you for that. Because I was like, wow, this is awesome, RTI. So, who's getting trained, and how are we getting in there? So, my $1 million question that I'm left with is the two groups that I am going to approach the question with some ignorance. Our casual SCAs and our TTOCs. How will they gain access to the training? And do we have a portal for them to do that, to ensure that when our subs are coming in, that they're at the same level that we want the rest of the team at?
Yes.
So it's a really good question. I think the biggest part for, as we have casual people coming in, our greatest hope is that within 3 years, this is the culture of our schools. So as I come in, I see, okay, this is how things are done. Right now, we have incredibly skilled, incredibly hardworking people who are working for the most part in isolation or in small groups, doing their absolute best. And what we're hoping is, as people come in, that we've created a culture of care, that we've created a culture of joy, we've created a culture of collaboration. So in the short term, we don't have a plan for our TTOCs, and we don't have a plan right now for on-call SCAs. But we're hoping as they come into the system, they will be able to receive some training, especially as it relates to RTI. But most importantly, it's that inclusive, compassionate classroom community that people will see that that's just how things happen in Langley. Thanks.
Because I see there's that gap there, can we work with our partner universities and do recommendations perhaps on especially the RTI one, right? That is such a foundational piece for us to be all speaking the same language. So I don't know if that's an outlandish thought or...
I don't think it's outlandish, and we're really trying to work more closely with our post-secondary partners in the teacher training programs, because there's a few gaps that we've noticed, and it's not sustainable for our district to continue to train people coming into the system to be at the level that we want them to be at in all kinds of different areas. So I think that's actually a really good point, and we certainly can bring that into our conversations.
Thank you so much. All right, I have Vice Chair Coburn, and then I have Trustee Todd.
Hello. That was a really thorough, comprehensive report. Somewhere in here is a question, and I'm hoping somebody can find it. I have some concerns, and not with your work. Your work is wonderful. So there was a statement, and it said, kids will not make it unless we intervene. And I know that, and good for you. But I can't help but think if such a need for an intervention is so necessary for so many of our children, you know, how do we push back against the system to demand that the system change instead of just trying to, you know, we've got 5%, we have 10%, we have 30%, because as you have pointed out, you said reclaiming youth at risk, and thank you for saying you don't like that expression because I don't care much for it either, but it's handy. But where it takes me is that the face of risk is changing, right? So we want at-risk youth are this, we put them in a little thing and we deal with them this way, and that's great. But that's not the case, right? So the face of risk is changing. It has a lot to do with economy, has a lot to do with technology, cost of living. So risk is changing, and the point of that is that it's increasing that risk. So you've got a system that's already maxed. You've got risk that's changing. That risk speaks a different language than the old risk. You have a system that can't already handle it. And then you said the key, I think it was you, Mr. Morgan, emotional trauma and secondary trauma to our educators. So where I go with this is that I really appreciate, like, don't misunderstand me. What you're doing is really wonderful and amazing work. Who ensouls you? And who ensouls our staff? And who ensouls our SCAs? And when do you ensoul yourself? And at what point do we stop demanding that people do more and give more and more for needs that a system and a government ought to be picking up, and just the constant downloading to the education system, like, well, you guys do it because you deal with kids. So at what point do we stop being so accommodating, and not that we ought to, that we push back so that we can ensoul our people that are doing this ensouling that's only going to increase? And so I guess my question to you is, from a board perspective, is there anything that the board can do to help with that intense burnout, right? So the system's already taxed. It sounds like you need more people. You're not getting them. How are you going to do it, and what can we do for you?
I think there's a lot there to unpack, and I think one of the first things I would say is I agree with you. Mike and I are, we don't like, well, and Don too, we don't like the word at risk. And we choose to look in terms of the term barriered, because it's barrier, you know, there are barriers to our student success. So how do we break down those barriers when we look at it that way? I think in terms of how do we ensoul ourselves, I go back to that evening when Michael and Kevin stood up in front of all of us and shared with us how vitally important it is, the work that we do, and that this work going forward will be important, and that when they drummed to welcome us and to start us in a good way, they asked all of our drummers and singers from our Aboriginal support program to go and stand, or Aboriginal education program to go and stand with them. That's something you wouldn't have seen 5 years ago. The intense pride for the Aboriginal support workers in our program to stand there and share their gifts with everyone was not only ensouling for them, it was ensouling for a lot of people there. The people who came up to me afterwards and said, this gets at what I mean, whatever moment it was, whether it was things that Jennifer shared, whether it was Michael and Kevin, whether it was our support workers drumming, whether it's just something that happened that night. They talked about how there was something there for them to grasp onto that allows them to feel rejuvenated and feel ready to do this. I think it aligns things in such a way. So we talk about all the things you need to do. Part of it is coming to an alignment and a connection of it all, interweaving. We were all doing things on our own, and now we're doing it together. And the work of many together is that much greater. And I think, you know, it's something as simple as, I go back to one of her little tricks that she shared with us, which sounds so unbelievably simple to do, but yet we don't think of doing that. And she has something called Spirit Buddies. And it's called Spirit Buddies because it's about maintaining your own spirit. And it's so simple. 3 people together in a group with the questions of, how are you doing today? And you need to get together and you need to greet somebody else. You need to greet your team and then talk about how things went, whatever happened for you the day before. And she says, it's great for kids. Kids feel connected when they come together, and you as the teacher or the educator group them in whatever group you choose. She says, but I've done it with adults. And we think about the times when we come to these meetings and we come in and we're carrying our burdens for whatever it might be. And if we don't have time to check in with one another and check in with our colleagues when we walk in and have that brief little conversation, that's the vitally important work that ensouls us all. And whether it's done here at the board office, the work that you do outside of here, the work that all of our partner groups go and do, and the work that's done within the schools, that's where the vitally important stuff happens.
Thank you so much. All right, Trustee Todd.
I want to talk about my favorite four-letter word, care. In education, sometimes we're accused of following a pendulum, and whether it was child-centered learning or whatever, oftentimes the best direction is to go back to the child. And when you use a term like compassionate learning communities or centers, it's all about dignity for the child. My challenge is, and this is a challenge I give to every staff in every school in our district, is to take on the task of getting to know the child's strengths. Because when you can open up that, then you will get relationship and you will get better outcomes for that child. Just that one thing, finding out what that child, and it could be anybody in that school. We know that. We know that from past practice. You also state, or it's mentioned, that compassionate, healthy staff, and it's already been mentioned that's our difficulty right now. Staff, there's almost like compassionate care burnout, or where they're just I'm out of here, or they're following, they're speaking with their feet and saying, I can go someplace else. It's become overwhelming trying to keep up a system. The key thing is to have hope. That's the counter. And I'm glad, no, I'm more than glad, ecstatic to hear that the process you've been through has ensouled you, and you need to share that with others. Send it out and about. Again, my question, how will we know when we get there?
We have some pretty clear measures, so we talk about a gap of equity. So we know, despite all of our best efforts, that a student who enters into kindergarten with certain markers is barriered to success. We know that. And we also know the interventions that work. We know that. Research shows it's been done in other jurisdictions. But going back to the First Peoples principles of learning and what we talked about reconciliation tonight is we said we'd hold Indigenous knowledge as equal to knowledge that has come from elsewhere. And the knowledge that's been on this land for 10,000 years is that the community does the work together, not in isolation. So the community has to do the work together. So to answer your question, we'll know when we're able to actually really work together, when you don't have an SEA who says, I'm just done, I spent the entire day with this poor guy, and I can't do it anymore. We'll know that we've achieved that success when you have 4 or 5 adults who have had a chance to wrap around that student, and then we'll know when we have no equity gap for our students of Indigenous ancestry, and we have no equity gap for our students who are in categories of learning disabilities or behavior disabilities, and we'll know when we have no gap for our students who identify as LGBTQ. That's when we'll know. And we have those concrete measures that we can grab to, and we're ambitious about them, for sure.
Thank you so much. The last name I have on the speakers list is Trustee Ross.
Best for last.
Are you adding yourself?
Sounds terrible. Anyway, moving right along. I'm just getting tired, I guess. I really love what you're doing, okay? I love everything the school district does. In fact, I just see you guys doing more all the time. I've got plans for you. I got other stuff I want you to work on, right? So I'm concerned you're just gonna get burned out. And then what am I gonna do? I'll have no one to do the stuff that I want you to do. So I'm concerned for you. So I started sitting here saying, well, if I was running the show, what would I do? And so my opinion, and for what it's worth, is the principals of every school knows already who the culture carriers, the compassionate culture carriers are. So identify, say 2, 3. You said 3, so let's go with 3. I like 3. And invite them into this. So you guys aren't doing all the work. You've got to get the team, the outside team. It's like, here comes a school district program, and everybody's busy already. But if you go to the people who love this stuff, they'll find time. They'll sleep less, but they'll be the people you want. So I would recommend you find those culture carriers and work with those people already. I'll shut up now. Thank you.
I want to first say that I really appreciate that you know that we're really busy, and I know you have plans for us. Just want to point that out. Go ahead, Mike.
Oh my. So I now feel like I shouldn't say anything.
Just on that one, for just the
Just hit that
for
button
Chair
right there.
Yeah, I'm just get an answer. Can you mention, because the solar in our school does exactly that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to.
Can you mention that?
Yeah. Yes.
So I think within the plan, so there is the school-based team that is coming to the dinner series. All of those were chosen with that in mind, or also those who we may need to get on board, who may not be those people, who could offer a discerning opinion for us to help keep us focused. We also have plans. The first time I actually heard about this book was from Laurie Villeneuve, who teaches at HD Stafford, who teaches the Indigenous Exploration program, OASIS, that they have there. And she uses it as her curriculum, essentially, in the classroom. So we have other champions within the district who have already been doing this, who we hope will come and be part of that district, I think we call it an implementation team, beyond just the group of us up here who are the kind of strategic planning team.
And just the last thing that I want to I'll end with anyway, is just Jennifer Cates says very clearly that the biggest single predictor of a child graduating successfully is their sense of belonging. And back to what Mike said, it's not just about the sense of belonging socially, emotionally. It's also about that sense of belonging academically and finding those access points for every learner to access the curriculum. And so if we can keep that eye on the prize, that if we really do that work around that, we are going to have more students successfully transition with that dignity, purpose, and plan for the future.
Thank you. I do have a few words to say, but I feel like I shouldn't. I don't want to steal Trustee Ross's thunder. But I just wanted to thank you for coming to present this update. I'm so excited to see all the connections it makes with the strategic plan. One of the things with organizations, especially something like a school district, it's so hard to get started on something that you can't measure with hard numbers. Like, we can see a 2% increase here, or where you have something that's completely leveled, like, you've moved from level C to B. It's always hard to have the courage, and so you were talking at the beginning about the circle of courage to undertake something, because as you know, coming back to report, it's hard to necessarily report right away, because you may not see those changes immediately, but you see them and you feel them. And one of the things that really stood out to me tonight when we had students coming was, you'll notice that several of them talked about how they felt. something that's, I think, kind of been discouraged in systems over time. Like, we don't want to hear about necessarily how you're feeling. We'd like to see, like, where you are now. Can you please demonstrate where you are on this chart, and where do you fit in, and where's the mean? And so seeing our strategic plan make so many connections, or you make so many connections with our strategic plan, I guess would be the more appropriate way, in a way that pays off to the betterment of society in such a different way. And everybody's affected positively. Something that really, as a board, was so exciting to see. So I wanted to just thank you for coming out tonight. I mean, each one of the trustees had such wonderful feedback towards that, but I just wanted to sort of punctuate that too, that it really is a wonderful report to have received, and it's very hopeful. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
To need a motion, so I will move that, or I need a mover, that the Board of Education receives the report on enrolling our schools for information as presented, and moved by Trustee Perot, seconded by Vice Chair Coburn. Any other comments on that? Seeing none, all those in favor, motion is carried. We are now on to the Secretary Treasurer's reports, and it's that time of year again, Secretary Treasurer. So 7.1, budget process and timeline 2020 to 2021. While we're already in the ones that have endings that have to something, that's, where does the time go? Preliminary operating budget, over to you. There you go, it's all yours.
Thank you, Chair Dyckman. As Megan mentioned, we are in the process of starting the next budget cycle. Staff has already been busy the last several weeks working on the amended budget process, which is always the starting point for our preliminary budget for the next year, being the 2021 year. So I wanted to go through a bit of the process and the timelines for the board, and I'd be willing to answer any questions at the end of that. So I just wanted to start with some of the factors that make up the process in developing the budget for the district. Your package carries some of the budget beliefs and values and principles which align with the district's values, mission, and vision, and the strategic plan. We go through a consultation process with our stakeholders, and I can show you the timeline for that in the schedule at the end of my presentation. As mentioned, we start off with the amended budget as the starting point for the process for developing the subsequent year's budget. One of the biggest impact to our budget, of course, is our enrollment and our enrollment projections, and there's quite a process for that, and I'll talk more about that as I have a slide further on some of those projections that are needed. And there's a few things that we need to keep in mind as we go through the process. One being the process that's undertaken right now by the ministry on potential changes to the funding model. Those changes we will not really see in their totality until March of next year, which does not give districts a lot of time to adapt to any consequences or changes that impact us. So that's something that we need to keep in mind as we go through, that we make sure that we have maybe even a bit of a buffer in our process to be able to absorb some of those changes that may come, as we saw this year when we did our preliminary budget with the funding that did change for this district. As always, we have to look at the any changes to the funding for the memorandum of agreement with the restored language for teachers, as that's becoming a larger portion of our ongoing budget. They do provide different guidance for that. This year we only received 80% of the funding in our preliminary budget for that, with the rest to be determined once we had actual numbers of students. And we won't actually know our restored language funding until the funding announcement in December. So that's always something that we have to keep an eye on. The district always starts with the concept of a status quo budget, and Also, this district needs to start looking at a longer view for the sustainability of our operating budget. As trustees are aware, this district has had accumulated surplus funds from prior periods that we have been using over the last number of years and drawing that down, and we've had conversations that we would need to start smoothing that out to get us back to a balanced budget position, which we are getting close to that position, and we'll have to consider that as we develop the preliminary budget for 2021. For those that are more visual, show a graphic on the concept of the status quo budget. We start with our amended budget, plus or minus any cost pressures that we're aware of, or any one-time items that were in the amended budget or that are coming up for the preliminary budget. Any changes for our enrollment or our enrollment funding, which equals our status quo expenditures once we receive our preliminary funding, and then that would give us our status quo budget, which we would only really get a first glimpse of in March once we receive our funding. On the expenditure side, enrollment growth also comes with changes to the staffing structures that we need to be aware of for our schools. So as we continue to be a district that is expected to grow, we also have to plan the staffing and the expenses that go with it. As already mentioned, we need to look at the changes in the teacher requirements for the restored language. We also have to take into account any changes in expenditures, such as benefit rates, which always seem to be going up year over year. School expenses, department requests for increased funding as we grow as a district. There are more and more needs, technology-wise, facility-wise, all those things as well. We also have to look at other cost pressures, such as the inevitable utility increases that happen every year. Wage lifts for our excluded and administration staff, as those are raises that are not funded currently by the ministry. So those are ones that the district has to find within their own funding. And removal of any one-time or non-continuous expenditure items. On the revenue side, the big thing is the impact on enrollment changes. Also, the funding model, there's another bullet point there. Those two are very linked this year. You know, we've seen some changes in the way they've allocated funds for this school year, in the way that they move some funds from metro districts to more rural districts, and also move things into targeted funding instead of places for where we would need to fund our teacher contracts. The international program, we'd have to look at any potential impacts to the revenue stream for our international students. And then if there's any other changes in any of the other supplements or funds that the ministry receives from us, or any other changes in local revenue for rentals and those kind of things like interest received on the funds that we have. Enrollment projections, and work on that will be starting in January. February 15th, all districts have to submit to the ministry their projections for the subsequent school year for enrollment for various categories. There are 3 different count points throughout the year. Not every category is done 3 times a year. Some of them are only done once, some done twice, and some done 3 times. The one that drives the bulk of our funding is only done once, and that's our regular students. We receive a count for that September 30th. So we are funded for the bulk of our funding for the number of kids that we have in seats as of September 30th each year, which is a struggle for a district like us that grows. Over the last couple of years, we've grown throughout the year, probably on average about 100 students that are not funded until the subsequent budget year. So that is a challenge for growing districts. For distance learning and continuing education, there are 3 counts for those. So those programs we are able to count for changes in growth. The biggest one being the count in September 30th, and then they do prorated amounts for February and May counts. We also have to put in projections for our summer sessions for the number of elementary and secondary students that we believe will be attending those programs in July. Our non-graduate adults projections for September 30th, and students with special needs for September 30th, and then they do a net increase account on February 20th. So if we have per category more students in a category, they do a partial funding in February. Our Aboriginal students that are not living on reserve, we need to project those as of September 30th, as well as our English language learners would also be projected on September 30th. Sorry for the small print, but wanted to give a bit of a visual as to the timeline, some of the actions that will be happening, and the linkage between the 2 budget cycles. As mentioned, we're already working with our schools. I believe the school budgets are actually due back to the district today or tomorrow. Tomorrow, the 20th. We've already started working with our central departments, and we've actually started working on the 2021 with our central budgets as well, which is a lot earlier than we have historically. And part of that is because of the tightness of the budget that is coming up. So we wanted to get a sooner glimpse on that. So we are going to do 2 touch-in points with people, more in line with when we used to, but starting that process now. During December and January, we will be finalizing our proposal to the board on the amended budget, but we will be checking in with the Finance and Facilities meeting. We've already provided one update on some of the budget pressures. You will receive another one on the 26th, and then also in January, before we bring back a recommendation on the February 25th, the board meeting, because we have to file those with the ministry by the end of February. As in past years, January to March, we'll be working with our stakeholders to get their thoughts and input and discussions with them on the budget. March 15th, is a very important date because that's the date we find out what the operating grants are going to be for the 2021 year. That is the last day before spring break. It's always lovely timing. And basically, we will touch base with our central departments and work with our schools in April, and touch base with their departments February through April to work on their budgets. And then we will be bringing back, hopefully for first and second readings, the preliminary budget for 2021 at the May 28th meeting, where we would then follow with our annual budget open house for the public, tentatively scheduled for July 5th, with the hope of having the final reading June 18th, so that we can be compliant with the requirement to file by the end of June our budget for the 2021 year. So that's the plan that is put before the trustees for their approval, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, so since we have an action motion that is accompanying this report, I'm going to get the motion on the floor first. I do have a speakers list, but if I could please get a mover that the Board of Education approves the school district number 35 Langley budget process and timeline 2020-2021 preliminary operating budget as presented, moved by Todd, seconded by Trustee Ross. And our speaker is Trustee Todd, and then I have Trustee Ross. So if you'd like to be on the speakers list, just let me know.
Thank you, and thank you again for updating us on the budget. I probably wouldn't be too far out there by saying it's likely we're going to be doing more with less. I have so many questions and so little time. in the consultation with stakeholders, and I don't want to presume what happens, but is there, are you going to them with potential, because we know the tap is turning off, and so are you, when you're consulting with them, are you asking them where potential savings may be, or is it just, what are you asking them in those?
Historically, it's been conversations with their partners of where they see needs or requests that they would like to see added to the budget. And to your point, Trustee Todd, that's going to be a harder conversation this year. It was a harder conversation this year. We weren't able to add very much from those requests. We could ask for thoughts on reductions. That's a harder conversation, obviously. But I do think it'll have to be a slightly different process than what it has been in the past.
Follow up.
Okay, follow up, but it's probably not really in the stem of the first one, but has there been talk of a second count? Because they do a second count for special funding. Has there been talk for, especially just for districts that are growing, such as ours, that in February they're doing some budget reappropriations anyways for a special ed? Has there been talk of almost acknowledging that at the provincial level and saying, okay, yeah, you're likely to grow over 100 students, that your district is actually carrying those 100 students and not getting funding during the course of the year?
We were at a conference, or I was at a conference with BC ASBO last week where the ministry was there, and one of the sessions they had was trying to provide some insight into some of the funding model proposals that have come. They didn't outline any of those things, but in the conversations with the recommendations from FDE to headcount, one thing that they did mention in there is something that they're contemplating and they're thinking of recommending is a mid-year count on regular K-12 students. No direction on that, but that is something that they're contemplating. They don't know if that would be a half a rate or a full rate or what that would entail, but they did acknowledge for the first time that that might be something that they need to consider for districts that are growing, that there is a recognition of those cost pressures for districts throughout the year.
Thank you. I have Trustee Ross.
Thank you, Brian. We sure appreciate you a lot, and we sure don't want to lose you, so I appreciate everything that you do, and make sure you get some rest. But I know lots of things keep you awake at night. And so I'm going to ask you my what keeps you awake question. But before I do that, I think we're kind of shocked this year. I think we let's say we lost a good chunk of our funding because the rural districts got more than what they'd ever got before. So it had to come from somewhere. So it came from urban districts. So if that trend was to happen again, what would we do? I was actually talking with one of the administrators thing with Lynn Fripps this week, and I was talking and hearing her story, and she was saying that every day she has a new student coming to her school. And this is like November, and they still have new kids coming around all the time. So we've got this date in September, but really, it's not really indicative of what's really happening in our schools. We got new kids coming all the time. So I just, my hat's off to you. I really don't want your job. But I would like to help you. And so what I would like to say is, if we're to, and I don't expect an answer to this, but if you were to lose the same amount of funding that we lost this year, if we were to lose it next year, what would you do? So I have a suggestion, and we talked to all of our stakeholders, but we never talked to students. I'd really like to see a discussion with students this year. What do you value? What don't you value? And listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Ross. All right, so I have Vice Chair Coburn next on the list. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I'm still recovering from Trustee Ross's comments. So Brian, Secretary Treasurer, you had said something, and actually it was Trustee Ross, and you said that there was a student coming in November, and we have this date in September, and it seems now it is arbitrary because the world has changed. And I think my question is, or my point is, the world has changed, and the system from like a government ministerial level hasn't. And so there's no accounting for urban districts. So we have kids coming in November, December because we are urban. So we're losing money because of rural, but we have challenges that wouldn't even occur to a lot of different districts. So we have people coming and going all year long. We have rapid development. We get roughly a new elementary school every year. Yet the model doesn't want to recognize this. And in fact, often we're said, well, you're lucky, you have more students, you can generate more, blah, blah, blah. You're so lucky, you're so lucky. No, we're not. So Secretary Treasurer, from a board perspective, what do we do, or what do people do to start to not even demand, but expect the government to adjust for the reality of school districts instead of treating them all with some kind of blanket policy that we have rural, urban, and suburban, and that's it, and that we could fund them all one particular way because it's not working. So from a trustee perspective, how do we push for an urban metro to get the recognition that we need for the funding needs that we have?
It's a good question. It's not sure that's one that I can answer right now, especially with the fact that we're undertaking a funding model and it's going to look very different in March than it does today. The ministry's saying that they want to do this to make it equitable and more predictable, and be able to use outside influence, not influences, but information to make sure that they have the right arguments to go to Treasury Board. If that happens, that's different than today. So that's why I would like to reserve judgment on that one until I actually see the model and what they do with the model. Because I know there's a lot of concern over this, the prevalence model, but if it is used the way that they say they are going to use it, it could drive funding into the system. And if that does happen, then I think it would provide benefit. But once again, that's at the discretion of Treasury Board, and that's separate than the people that are bringing this in. So I think it's a great question. Well, maybe a little later than that, because March we'll see what the model is, or it's going to take some time to see what they do with this model. And like they did provide some information last week that did give me some glimmers of potential hope, which was a lot more than I've had in a long time in these conversations. So I'd like to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Thank you. So I don't have anybody else on the speakers list. I do have a...
Sorry, Dave.
Oh, second speakers list. Okay, so we're on to second speakers list. So 2 times. If you'd like to speak a second time, it's now over to Trustee Todd.
Sure, I did have, I said I had several questions. So I know that in the past, you've always talked about the advantage we've enjoyed, the average age of our teachers. And it's not that we're ageist or anything, but that basically there's a financial reason for it, and that has been changing the last several years. Could you, without getting specific, could you just say what's likely to happen in the near future that way?
Thank you, Trustee. That is also a concern. We have one of the lower average teacher costs in the province currently, which means we have a lot of increments to be going as teachers move up the scale with experience and time. So that's one of the things that we built our surplus funds from, was the fact that we would have teachers retire and have younger teachers coming in, and we would have a fairly large favorability in our average teacher cost every year that we could save and build up the surplus. That changed last year and is changing still. I don't see us having those big surpluses anymore going forward in those categories, as we have one of the lower average teacher costs in the province. So it does make the discussions that we're having on budget tighter, because that was always a back pocket item that we have that I don't think we have any longer.
Do you have any other questions, trustees? Are you good? You sure? Okay. All right. So I do have just a question before we vote on the motion before us. One of the things that we've heard in all the consultations quite recently is that there's an expectation, and there's no details, but just an expectation that as a district, we're going to be implementing a new funding formula in the spring. Like, and it's a statement. So it's like, your district will be implementing a new funding formula in the spring, which nobody's seen. Nobody knows what it looks like. Nobody knows what that means, because it could mean many things. And your budget consultation process has been built around how we have done it, correct? So what I'm wondering is, if that's the case, and in anything that perhaps has come up recently, is there any chance that how you're building this consultation for our budget, which is of course very important for transparency and accountability to those that we serve as a board, do you see any risk that we're going to end up with a change also in the consultation process quite suddenly? Or do you have any sort of, and I'm not asking you to sort of, put on your clairvoyant hat, I'm wondering if there's anything that you could see coming that could sort of create an issue with our consultation, or create an issue come spring, beyond we have a surprise in how much money is going to show up, which is usually the case. So, but consultation-wise, as we move forward, have you heard anything that might be an expectation and a change in that?
When you say consultation, you mean with our partners or with which?
Generally, the process that you take. So when you go out, you're looking at sort of how we're funding schools now, and then we're meeting with our partners, and then we're taking certain things into consideration. But if there was a monumental shift in the way we were going to be, like schools were going to be funded, that could have an impact on the types of questions we ask and what we look at, and then that could put us in a position where we've had this consultation, the intent is that it's meaningful and authentic, and then suddenly come the second week of spring, March, something totally different shows up, and now we're implementing something, and that whole consultation we've done, although it wouldn't be our district's fault, it's hard to have confidence in a system when consultation has been going in one direction and funding that shows up is going in another direction. So I'm just wondering if there's been anything that we as a district could do to help ensure that as we're consulting, we're building that confidence, not knowing really what's coming down the pipe.
I think some of that's going to depend on where our amended budget comes out at the end, because that's going to dictate for us what monies we need from our accumulated surplus to balance the amended budget, which will then, I think, start dictating the conversations for what we have for 2021 when it comes to balancing a budget. My goal would be that we have the $2.4 million right now to balance subsequent budgets. If we can happen to not use any of that for the amended budget, my goal would be to not use more than half of that in our preliminary budget, which would then give us a little bit of a buffer if anything did go drastically wrong with funding. So I think as a district, we're trying to put some plans in place. We have started talking to some departments as to, if something drastic did happen, can we start preparing some areas that could be cut and have a list of those so that we have those as back pocket items as well if needed. So I'm not sure if that totally answers your question, but I think the first step for us is getting an amended budget and knowing where we're at with that.
So if I hear you, it's more of a strategic, how can we build a buffer to, even if it doesn't go well, so that it doesn't go too far off the rails, then as we move forward in the next cycle, we've at least built some contingencies around no matter what happens this cycle, because there's so much uncertainty.
And this year wasn't the best year for us to also hit the timeline that we need to put our financial house back in a little more in line with a balanced budget structure with a fundamental changing of a financial model. So it's a bit of a perfect storm. to be honest. So I do think we need to be fairly as conservative as we can when we're putting together the preliminary budget. What I don't want to see happen is that $2.4 million be used to balance the preliminary budget next year, and then we're right back the following year with zero safety net and have to maybe make even more difficult choices.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. That's important as we move forward and we're considering. So I appreciate that very much. So we do have a mover and a seconder, and I'll just restate the motion. So the motion that we are considering tonight is that the Board of Education approves the school district number 35 Langley budget process and timeline 2020-2021 preliminary operating budget as presented. It's been moved, it's been seconded, we spoke. Are there any other speakers on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried unanimously. All right, so we just have 2 items left on the agenda now, and I'll remember both of them. So we first have trustee comments. So I will start on my far left, because last 2 times I started on my far right. I'm going to start with trustee Wilson. Trustee Ross.
That was much too short. I didn't have a chance to write anything down, but I was going to share what book I was reading. But anyway, that's.
You can all thank me now.
Yeah. Okay. I'll pass. Thank you very much.
Aw, poor trustee Ross. Trustee Todd.
Thank you. As many of you may know, one of my passions was advocating for seatbelts on school buses, and there was a question asked in the legislature last week by MLA Laurie Thronis from Chilliwack, and the answer that was given has given me some hope that apparently there's, at the federal level, they're looking at regulations for perhaps January 1st, 2021 around seatbelts in our school buses. So that's, again, there's no guarantees, but that's just a regulation thing, so hopeful.
That's great news. All right, thank you, Trustee Ward. Trustee Perot. Vice Chair Coburn.
Lovely to see you all. Thanks for coming. Have a good night.
Thank you, and thank you, Vice Chair Coburn. I just have a couple quick.
I need to talk more because I can.
No, I was able to flip my page just quickly. I thought I had a while, but I was wrong. So
Mixing it up.
December the 4th, we have our trustee Christmas social. We will have invitations going out, but hopefully we can see some of you there. It's always wonderful to have an opportunity just in an informal setting at the end of the year to meet and talk. And I just wanted to mention, you'll see in the package tonight, Trustee Todd had pulled out of our consent agenda an item, a letter related to vaping, and there was a motion that came out of the board, and on behalf of the board I wrote a letter, and shortly after that, and I'm going to say it's because of our letter, even though there was one that came out of provincial council too, but I feel that it was our letter. There was an announcement of action on behalf of the province. Of course, we'll be watching as a board and those that work in our schools on the front lines every day just to see if it makes a difference. But it was great to see a response there because it was something that you would hear the passion of everybody on this board who wanted to see some change. So it was just great to have that response. It was a nice thing. So I just wanted to share that. And now we are on to question period. I know it's a big crowd tonight. Is there anybody who has any questions? Oh, okay, come on now. So you still have to state your name and everything, and even though we all know each other here, but tape doesn't. So
my name is Monique Pierce. I'm the VP for 1260, and I'm also a bus driver for 1260. So I have a question for David Todd.
Oh, sure. So it comes to me.
Oh, sorry.
And then after that we can I'll have to say, so you directed to me and I'll stop. I didn't read my usual spiel. Just needs to be related to the topic, and then we'll do our best to answer it. Sometimes we have to come back to you though on it, but definitely please do ask your question.
It's to a comment that was made about possible, am I allowed to ask about possible seatbelts on buses?
For sure, you can ask that question. We'll do our best for sure to answer it.
My concern is how are they going to implement keeping children seat belted?
Right.
Are they going to be putting a monitor on every bus? So basically, a bus is like a plane, the bus driver is like a pilot, and you have a stewardess.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. That's a really good question. You know, when we were at Provincial Council and we were talking about it, and it also came up at the AGM, there were a lot of unknown questions, and that was one of the things that we haven't had any information back yet from the province on what that would look like. So our hope and what we would as a board definitely advocate for if more information came out was that, and it was part of the motion, that a very thorough consultation takes place with all those that are affected. So of course a group like yours would have to be at the table to answer those very important questions. So you are, your question has been one that has been raised by many people. Cost, how do you retrofit a bus? How are you going to ensure that people are seat belted in? You know, how does that liability, where does that fall? Also, you know, there's some division on whether or not it's actually safer, so those would come out. So what I'm hearing from the province, and I'm sure Trustee Todd would agree, is that there's an initial conversation being looked at, and though there is a lot of consultation that needs to be taken place. And Trustee Todd, just before we wrap that up, does that capture where you're coming from?
They haven't worked through it too. The six largest states in the United States have it in their bills now. And they look at it's almost like a circuit board above the bus driver, kind of just in the seats with an LED light. Yeah.
I consider it like
It's another.
a responsibility on the driver. I mean, you already have to try to keep the kids in their seats and not doing stuff. I mean, if they decide to take their seatbelt off, you happen to be pulled over. Next thing you know, there's 5 kids without their seatbelts on. Like, is a light going to come on if they take their seatbelt off? Are we in charge of the seatbelts? Do we unclick the seatbelts when we stop to let a child off? Like,
right. So what
it would be a big concern, and I think a lot of the bus drivers would probably. It may be an issue on whether or not you keep bus drivers.
For sure. So what we can do is through our association, we do receive updates on those sorts of consultations. I know that the group that meets is really good about making sure all the groups that are affected are kept apprised. So if we see something come in, then definitely coordinate to make sure that you're aware of that conversation. Okay. So thank you for the question. I really do appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Have a good night. Any other questions? Okay, I don't see any. So thank you, everybody who's come out tonight. On that note, I will need a motion to adjourn at 9:20. Moved by Trustee Ward, seconded by Vice Chair Coburn. All those in favor? Have a wonderful night, everybody. Thank you so much.